John in Daytona Beach, Florida. Daytona 500. I think that's maybe. Do they do that on the beach? Nah, it's got to be in a racetrack. Shows you what I know about car racing. Ain't much. Okay, he writes to me and he says, "Can you detail that Studer recording board? What are its capabilities? It looks like a 12 or 16 track board with microphone inputs. Limiters, compressors, solid state transistors, integrated circuits, EQ. What's in it?" Okay. Yes, this is a Studer board. This is Octave Records' analog board. It was originally purchased by the Rolling Stones, and they used it for both a PA mixer when they went on tour. They used, I don't know if they might have recorded some of the live albums on it. That, I don't know the exact history, but I know that they had it for years. They sold it to Neil Young. Neil Young bought it from the Stones, put it into his place, and had it for years. Did a lot of his, I think he did a lot of his work for composing and, like test mixes. I don't think there was ever an album actually recorded or mixed on this by Neil Young, but he did own it for years. It was subsequently bought by Christopher Sloan, who owns Animal Lane, the studio that we at Octave Records use a lot to record at as we're building our own studio. And we bought it from Chris, a few years ago when he bought a Trident, which is an even bigger board, and he always had his heart set on that Trident. And it's been no end of trouble for him. I mean, some of these older boards require full-time technicians to keep them going. But fortunately, Gus keeps this maintained. It's pretty dang sturdy. We don't have a lot of problems with it, so knock on wood. Okay, the board is a 32 channel, not a 16 or a 12. It's 32 tracks, 32 channels. Plus you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 separate buses, and then the master over here. It's all contained in 8 feet, I'm guessing, about 8 feet. And it's a gorgeous sounding board. It's one of the nicer sounding boards I've ever heard. It's analog, and our process is to record everything in DSD, which, as you know, I'm Gus and me and Jessica and everybody at Octave Records are passionate proponents of DSD because it's as close to analog as you're ever going to get, far better than the traditional PCM recording, and it records at 64 times the speed of CD. It is much better than any analog recording equipment in the world. I mean, DSD just blows away an analog tape recorder or even direct-to-disc. I mean, it is the cat's meow. So we record everything in native DSD. We then take the Meitner converters, go from D to A's to analog. We do our mix on this board in analog and then back to DSD. And that's how we wind up with the DSD masters. Now, we are working on a whole new system that will eliminate this analog board, and we'll talk more about that as we go along, because that's a huge decision, and we're doing tests now to make sure that it can sound not only as good as analog, but better than analog, because, look, every piece of the chain adds to the sound. That's just the way it is. So this Studer board is one of the best sounding analog boards out there, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. So 32 channels, and they're pretty simple. Each channel here, each row has basically a volume control. It has a balance control. We call it a pan pot, but it's a balance control. Left, right, center, right? A mute, so I don't want to hear this channel, I can mute it. A solo, so I can hit the solo button and hear just this channel. If all of the 32 tracks are running, it just solos that out. A PFL, which is pre-fader. So that pre-fader level, when I click that, I'm going to hear what it sounds like soloed, but before this volume control. So two simple kind of things. And nicely, they put a red LED so that when I don't know if you can see that, when I click that, it turns it on, because I can't tell you the number of times I've come in here and go, what the hell, I can't, none of these are working. And then you look down here, oh, bingo. And that's really nice. And then you can assign it to some of these other buses, which takes it maybe here or there or wherever you want to go. Some EQ and an aux send, so I can send it somewhere. And if I have a reverb unit over here, I put that on one of the buses, and then I can add reverb with this pot to any of the channels. But the reverb is outside of the board. That's all done over here on a plate or on electronics or on spring or whatever we have. So aux sends for things like reverb, echo, and then EQ, and then a couple of other buttons here that tell me if it's overloaded or whatnot, and that's it. Pretty darn simple. The entire board is solid state. It runs on the classic NE5532. The NE5532 is, gosh, it's got to be 30, 40 years old. It's one of the older op amps still in use today. If we at PS Audio are designing a product, we have often turned to the NE5532 because it's a great sounding integrated circuit, no doubt about it. Is it the best in the world? No. Discrete is the best in the world, and there are a few analog mixing boards and tracking boards that are discrete, but they are far and few between. So most of them use integrated circuits. I particularly like this. The Trident that we talked about uses what's called a TLO82. Don't like TLO82s. And this gets into the battle of op amps, right? So a 5532 is a complete bipolar op amp, and it sounds musical and great. A TLO82 is a hybrid. It has a JFET on the input, so it has this softer sound. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the sound of JFETs, but the way the TLO82 is, it's soft, it's lossy, and people like the sound. I as a purist, don't like the sound of it. So that Trident is filled with TLO82s, while this is 5532s. And I prefer these and the sound to it. In the future, we will make this into a museum piece, because we're going to go from DSD to a new way using a Zephyr filter to then mix and then back to DSD. And I'll tell you all about that later. Okay. Thanks. I'll talk to you sometime in the future, maybe even tomorrow, if you're lucky. If you're around, be there. Okay. Thanks. Appreciate you watching. Bye.